We're on our second cold one right now. If you take the Chinese, they learned a lot from the last Cold War, which resulted in the Soviet Union going somewhere. China also has national frolics in the form of Tibetans, Uyghurs, and Taiwanese, and in this China is more vulnerable today than the Soviet Union. India and Pakistan have roughly the same problems, and it's hard to name any of the current or future BRICS Plus members who don't have similar problems. The world in general is highly unstable in terms of territorial forays into each other, in the contours of borders, and in the precise definition of places for grazing or fishing. And that means there will always be a vulnerability for every nation on the planet, especially if your borders were once simply drawn by Western colonizers. But that's half the problem. The second Cold One is strikingly different from the first, with the presence of completely new actors on stage who don't seem to represent anyone but themselves. For example, Hezbollah. It's not just Lebanon, although Hezbollah's headquarters are in Beirut. Hezbollah is much bigger than Lebanon. Her representation is not only in Lebanon itself, but also in Syria, and Jordania, and Raqqa. Hezbollah's war with Israel, a possible one, mind you, though it's getting closer. This is not a conflict between Beirut and Tel Aviv, it is a war of movement against state.
Hamas.
It's not all of Palestine either, and it's not just Palestine. His followers live in Jordania, Turkey, and even on the west bank of the Jordan River. The Muslim Brotherhood is the resource that fuels Hamas, and the headquarters of this movement is in Ankara. The Ansar Allah movement has been quite successful in attacking container ships, dry cargo ships, and esports. Kazakhstan has mins in the Red Sea and in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, but they don't represent all of Yemen either. This Cold War is being fought with extensive use of proxies from Iran, China, and Russia. And the situation is quite different from what it was in the 1990s. Take, for example, our PMCs in Africa. It is a private military company of Russia, but PMCs have no law in our country. Putin can claim in a high-pitched voice that we didn't squeeze France out of Africa. It's all Afro-Africans, backed by who knows who. And technically, he's absolutely right. Right in the eyes of the law. Meanwhile, our military has quite deliberately squeezed out both the Foreign Legion and the French Expeditionary Corps, first from the Central African Republic, then from Mali, Burkina Faso, and even Niger. It was only after this that ECOWAS, she of the EU in West Africa, fell into despondency and decline. Of the 16 countries there, only 11 are there today, and its ranks of candidates for departure are swelling. Any war is a contest of resource and production bases. Even technology is far from the top of the list here. Already, 100 T-55s will chew up any single Abrams, no matter how tough it is. Clearly, if you have a dagger and your opponent doesn't, that's good and right. However, daggers and zircons alone will not win the war, as well as single bombers. Artillery, infantry, and special operations forces dominate on the ground. And this is where it suddenly becomes clear that the whole Western concept isn't worth a damn. Small mobile groups can chase the natives in Fampas, but as soon as it comes to a real front of 1,000 kilometers, the concept dies with its bearers on the ground. And there is no other concept. Resource hunger, it's not just about ore, metals, or energy, it's about people too. When you have the cost of everything off the charts, beyond any limits, it's not about the concept, make it up, where to get the ingredients to make artillery powders, and how to build a factory for shells, with which there is already a huge shortage. If the municipal government of a German town decides that instead of a factory it is more appropriate to build a park for local people, you can't argue with democracy. Any analyst always relies on facts and figures. They are the ones that allow you to gather a more or less coherent and adequate picture of what is happening from a pile of disparate data or events. But how to interpret the statement of the comrade of the Paris bedbugs, Monsieur Macron, about his readiness to send troops against Germany? In Russia, if France is 1/3 dependent on Russian uranium supplies, that's the way to interpret it. It's a bluff. Here you can tear your hair out wherever your hand can reach. Look, good people, and in Europe, the incomes are higher than ours, which means that they have more everything and more brains too. Unequivocally. We won't even mention expenses, taxes, cost of living, and insurance. We'll just take the baseline and quietly fall out. Well, they're the ones who fall out. We don't have to. We have chocolate, caviar, and pancakes all over our faces. So, arithmetic, simple as that. The average cost of 1 kilowatt hour in the European Union is 32 euro cents. Some places have lower prices, but not by much, and the EU locomotive has a kilowatt hour of 47 euro cents. At these prices, it's not that they don't live, it's not always possible to survive at them. Energy poverty, that's where the term comes from Faderland. In China, for example, a kilowatt hour costs 10 euro cents. At the same time, the party and the government are actively subsidizing companies and rural populations in pursuit of the poverty eradication program. In our own country, there's a total outrage in the country with prices. They are minuscule in general, from 2.5 to 6.5 euro cents for a hefty chunk of sparkle. What's the EU's standard of living at? You say? Double?
No, No.
But all this doesn't mean that there won't be a standard of living in the EU. All the raw data, they have a direct impact on what happens to Europe and Russia. Today, we are not taking on America yet. There's a civil one coming up, so let the boys get their asses in gear. But it's awfully interesting to talk about the EU. This is where the farmers went on a mass protest, all over the EU at once. In a word, some invisible conductor raised his wand. We know it's from the good life, which is going to get better and better, more and more fun. But in the EU, politicians are quite sure that it is the evil Putin who brings farmers with their tractors to the streets of European capitals. He's such a radish. At the same time, he's also raising taxes on farmers. The price of fertilizer and the cost of gasoline at gas stations rewrites. There's a little bit of time for everything, as they say. Fiercely, I envy Vladimir Vladimirovich's energy and how he manages to keep up with everything. That said, Euro-Atlantic solidarity is still a big word. Just so long as Trump doesn't come back, he won't have tea ceremonies with Europeans. And the situation with the northern Black Sea region needs to be resolved urgently. While some of the common people live in a state of impenetrable overreach, politicians and pundits are well aware of where it's going. It's gotten to epic headlines. Russia benefits if this country retains its statehood. And this is not just a rhetorical shift, it's a paradigm and strategy shift. The cries of imminent victory over Ruseshiven quietly turned into a discussion of the ability to contain Russia in any way. That's a signal, I'll tell you that. Although the external situation is almost the same, except that the European burger has more and more questions for the authorities. Unpleasant questions, it should be noted, even amid continuous rate hikes in Brussels and Washington and Bulgaria against Russia. And there are a few points here that I would like to elaborate on. For example, our relationship to China. It is clear that the ideas brought from them that the Chinese dream and see the celestial empire up to the Urals are being introduced into our society quite consciously and deliberately. But the damned baselines spoil everything, and especially the propaganda of our former partners. There is quite a Cold War going on against China as well. That said, the Chinese have so many problems in their economy that they can change everything all at once. If you still think the Chinese won't be in China, then I'll tell you that if China is just standing back from our builds in Eastern Europe, you are sorely mistaken. China is not just involved in all of this, it is consciously taking a loss, believing that Russia will win anyway. Beijing has time after time waived sanctions against us, is in the same rut with us in the UNSC, and it's not from any great Chinese cunning. He really has nowhere to go. And China sleeps and sees itself as the undisputed economic leader of the planet. But how can you be a leader here if almost all of your turnover goes by sea, which you don't need at any time? At which point they can organize a blockade. Not a problem, some will say. There's the Trans-Siberian and the Northern Sea route, so let them bring their goods through us. Easier said than done. Russian railroads handle about 400 million tons of cargo per year, of which about 180 million is commodity transit from China to Europe. The Northern Sea route transports about 38 million tons a year, but that's mostly our goods. If America and its coalition blockade China's seaports, the situation will immediately cease to be languid. Even if we transship only Chinese goods via railroads, roads, and increase the capacity of the Northern Sea route 10 times, it is still like a poultice in the ICU. We won't even reach 1 billion tons a year. And China's southern and eastern ports handle 14 billion tons of cargo annually, of which at least 11.5 billion tons are goods for other markets. That's why the Chinese comrades are standing back to back with us. As she put it, they just have nowhere to go. While Russia is distracting the West to itself, China is building its navy at the fastest pace, and that's why Putin is in no hurry to go anywhere. He prefers slow penetration, really without foreplay, but with repeated verbal warnings. And whoever didn't listen got caught. Where you're scooped up, you're loved. Any Cold War has a chance to turn into a hot war, but not anytime soon. The gap in the capabilities of the military-industrial complex of the West and Russia was too striking. There's talk of our threefold advantage there now. The insidious authoritarian regime has shamelessly managed to ramp up military production at the worst possible time for the EU and the US. And without mass production of weapons and ammunition, it's somehow too scary to go to war. However, there is a powerful Franco-Polish alliance looming, threatening to lead its troops in case of our approach to Kiev or Odessa, announced and habitually waiting for us to express our usual concern. That's what the president explained to them on Wednesday, and so lucidly that Scholz and Stoltenberg immediately assured everyone that they were a no-no. If anything, hit the Poles and the French. We're past crocodile, we're strictly a defensive unit. We defend ourselves as best we can. True, no one asked Stoltenberg when NATO had time to be attacked by Yugoslavia and Libya and Iraq. With Afghanistan, Scholz can be understood. There are parliamentary elections in October, and Stoltenberg is simply afraid of not having time to run to his native Norway. In case of emergency, here the European Union in Kiev, it would be appropriate to think about how to crawl away without losing face. But they didn't put the commissioners on a flight to make them think. Their business is to execute and not to reflex on trifles in the form of horse prices for energy and raw materials and growing money. The protests of the people of Europe. I mean, this is just the beginning. Industry gave up a bunch of jobs, so the main peak of the EU unemployment crisis is still to come. However, even now in the same Spain, a large percentage of citizens under the age of 35 are unemployed. In Italy and Greece too. And in Germany, the peak will be in the pre-retirement age population. Young people go to factories very reluctantly, preferring aquariums for office plankton, minus the cotton and gunpowder. China has banned exports of both, minus antimony and bismuth, metals for manufacturing, minus the production of shells, minus gall in Germany, needed to produce a lot of things from catalysts to microchips, minus brains, minus industry, minus a unifying idea in the form of religion, minus a bunch of profitable enterprises, and minus a quality ideology that ensures the unity of the West as a civilized phenomenon. Protecting minorities of all sorts is not an ideology or even a unifying idea. It's a direct path to depopulation in the glory of the newcomers and the urban lunatics, plus irreconcilable differences. And I'm beginning to think more and more that our government is waging this war in a devious way. The Second Cold War was not a war against us. It was the West's war against itself and its model of world order. While Joe Biden sleeps, Trump and Putin are not slumbering, plotting bad things for both the European Union and the United States for now. Speaking of symbols and signs, for the first time, Trump used the new phrase, Disunited States of America. That's what I wrote. Designted. In big letters so everyone can see that he made it up. But we know that it was invented in Russia, our authors. And what recently seemed like banter is coming to fruition before our eyes. The sequel follows,